here very nicely by Jessica, and to go over some sports nutrition for the half and the full marathon. For how many of you have done a half or full before? Sounds like a lot of you, or all of you. Not everyone? Okay. So you know that the nutrition can make or break the race, not just in terms of performance, but also in terms of enjoyment. I'd just like to point out, it says at the top here, but the average half marathon, full marathon runner expends about 600 to 800 calories an hour. So obviously over 4 hours or however long it takes you, that's a lot of calories. About 150 grams of carbs an hour, a liter to a liter and a half of fluid, and like 1,000 milligrams of sodium every hour. So that's kind of like the breakdown. I mentioned those things because that's usually kind of the things that we take into consideration when we're talking about fuel, right? The overall calorie intake, the carbs, the fluid, the sodium. And then from there, we usually break it down into before, during, and after. But the first thing that we usually look at if you were to come into our office is we get you to do a food log for a few days. So that's the first thing I recommend that all of you do if you want to start to take a look at your nutrition that you're taking in right now. So take a food log, keep track of what you eat and drink, and include the times that you're taking in food or fluid over the course of a day, and do that for about 3 days. And you want to look at first, is the intake, adequate? There's some ways that you can know what adequate is for you, but I'll talk about that later. You want to look to see, is about half of your intake coming from carbohydrates? Right, so the starches, the fruits, the grains, all of that. And about 15% should be coming from protein. And those are really the major things. And I kind of, outlined the amount of servings that's equal to in terms of carbs and in terms of protein. Really, if you're getting a decent serving of protein 2 to 3 times a day, you should be okay. And if you make sure that you're incorporating some type of carbohydrate in the form of whole grains every time you eat, then you should be pretty good there too. As far as fats, obviously fats are an important part of a healthy diet, especially for athletes when your needs get sufficiently high because of training, and the healthy fats help decrease inflammation. So you want to make sure that you are including some of those as well. So as far as pre-nutrition, before your workouts, before your races, the rule of thumb is about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Well, that would be during, but usually 30 to 60 grams before is a good kind of intake too. So you have some flexibility in terms of when you take that in. So if you're someone who tolerates food about an hour beforehand, your intake might look different from someone who's taking in their food about 2 to 3 hours beforehand. In general, though, a moderate carbohydrate load about 3 to 4 hours beforehand should cover your bases. As far as fluid beforehand, I usually tell my clients, rather than getting into specific ounces, if you take a typical bike-sized water bottle, which is about 24 ounces, you want to drink about 2/3 of it 2 to 3 hours beforehand, and the other third about an hour beforehand. And that should cover your fluid needs before a workout. As far as during the workout, I mentioned you really want to be aiming for about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. So what does that look like? I listed a few simple things here. A GU is a little, one GU will be just under 30 grams, about 20 depending on the one that you do. Half a banana is 15, so a whole banana would get you that. Sports drinks, about 8 ounces of an endurance formula sports drink should be sufficient. So if you were again to take in a 24-ounce size water bottle filled with an endurance formula over the course of an hour, that would be sufficient. So usually you want to start there, cover your needs as far as that goes, and if you find that you can tolerate more or you need more, it's good to have a little extra on hand, then you can supplement beyond that. Since fluid is usually the easiest thing to get down and the formula is designed to be most easy on the digestive tract, I suggest starting there and then supplementing beyond that with a GU or shot blocks or sport jellies, whatever, something like that. And those are things that are easier to have on hand. So that's during. As far as fluid during, obviously if you're starting with a sports drink, then you get that 24 ounces per hour. But the best thing to do is to do a sweat test. Has anyone done a sweat rate test? No? Okay. So I think it's on here. Maybe it's not. But basically you are weighing yourself before and after a workout that's at least an hour, preferably naked. So if you don't, you want to make sure that if you can't be naked, you want to make sure that your clothes are dry before and after. Obviously the sweat afterwards will weigh you down a little bit. But you're weighing yourself before and after workout, and you're calculating exactly how much fluid you drink. Okay, so you can do it that way. You know, we do it in our office. We can kind of go through the details if you guys want to do it. But the best way to approximate your fluid, how much fluid you need to take in during, is to know your sweat rate. Okay, if you know that you're really, you know, if you sweat a lot, it's different for everyone, then you should aim to take in more than 24 ounces an hour. But definitely take in 24 ounces an hour. That's typical for most people. You can go by your thirst mechanism, but there is a lot of controversy over, you know, whether that kicks in at 1% or 3% of fluid loss, and that can compromise performance a lot, obviously. So you want to know your sweat rate. That's a good thing to know. What else did I want to say about fluid?
Can you drink too much fluid?
Yes, you can drink too much fluid, and that's why there's a lot of controversy if you're drinking, you know, every hour 24 ounces and you don't sweat that much, you know, obviously that you can drink too much. That would be like hyponatremia, and unfortunately the symptoms of drinking too much and not drinking enough are pretty much the same. So, you know, it's a good idea to know your sweat rate if you're going to be running a lot and doing a lot of races. So I can talk about the details of doing that if you want at the end. And then you want to make sure that you're including some sodium, right? So obviously most sports drinks do have sodium, but some don't. Even some of the endurance formulas contain 0 sodium. So you really want to know what's the sodium content of the sports drink that you're using. If you're a particularly salty sweater, you know, if your clothes after your workouts, once they dry, if you see that white caked on, or if you have a dog and they're licking you a lot when you come home, you know, you really want to know if you're a really salty sweater, you probably have an idea. And then you want to make sure that you're getting extra sodium too. So obviously the specific needs vary quite a bit. And then after, you want to make sure that you consume some sort of carbohydrates and protein and sodium within 30 minutes after any workout that is an hour or longer. I'm emphasizing that because I think that in my experience, it's the one place where I think people fall short. Is you miss that recovery period, you're planning basically to start your next workout in debt. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to miss that window. The 30-minute window, that recovery is happening at the fastest rate. So even though it's going to continue for up to, you know, 6 hours, even 24 hours, depending on the intensity of your workout, you don't want to miss that 30-minute window. So you always want to have something on you. Carry something that contains a foundation of carbohydrates, a little bit of protein, and sodium. So for some people, it's a smoothie, right? A smoothie can be with fruit, and you get some protein with the yogurt, or even peanut butter is great because it has sodium and protein in there. For some people it's a turkey sandwich, for some people it's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, for some people it's a little bit of sports drink and a handful of pretzels. It can be a lot of different things, but you want to have something, and don't ever miss that 30-minute window. Okay? And then in another 2 hours you can have a meal, a proper meal. You should be doing that anyway. Usually it happens that within that next 2 hours you're ready for another meal. So make sure that you don't miss that recovery window. If you want to lose weight, right? A lot of people take the opportunity for a half marathon or marathon, or sometimes they even sign up for one because the goal is that they think, you know, they're going to lose weight, and it doesn't work out the way they planned, right? Because sometimes your appetite is increased, or you feel that you're burning off so many more calories, so you're eating a lot more. And that's just not the case. So you want to make sure that you're not eating. If you do want to lose weight, you want to make sure that you have a plan, and that you're not cutting back the calories too much, too close to a race. So our recommendation is to get an RMR test, which is basically tells you, and I think for all athletes in general, just knowing your baseline needs, it's a good idea to have that done. But that test tells you exactly how many calories you burn at rest across a 24-hour day, so that you know how much should I be consuming on my hard days, maybe usually Saturday or Sunday, and how much should I be consuming on my rest days.
What is RMR?
RMR is your resting metabolic rate. Sorry. So it's just a test that tells us exactly how many calories you burn over 24 hours. And then you know obviously that your intake on rest days should be very different from your intake on a long day. And the best way to get in those overall calorie needs is to eat it consistently throughout the day. So that's something else you can look at on your food log to make sure that you're never going more than 4 hours without food, right? Because once your needs get sufficiently high, you know, you don't want to be relying on a big load before a race, before a run, you know, to be on your digestive tract. So those are really the basics. Are there any specific questions, or did you want me to go into the details of the sweat test?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So in the past, we've always brought, the coordinators and mentors will bring. We obviously have water and Gatorade here before running, after running, and they'll stop. Runners will stop and look at the tree in the long run. But afterwards, we always have bagels and cream cheese for runners. What do you think about that?
That's fine. Yeah, I think that's good. It's a simple carbohydrate. It's about 4 servings of carbohydrate, and you're getting the protein. You just want to make sure you're getting some sodium in there, but you should be getting some in the cream cheese. And if you're drinking, the Gatorade or whatever, you'll have some there too. But that's not uncommon.
That's an adequate recovery.
Yes.
Okay.
And just as long as it's within 30 minutes.
Yep.
So that's perfect. Yeah. Any other questions?
What about salt and cramps?
Yeah, so obviously, the big losses are sodium chloride and potassium, and calcium and magnesium, but those to a lesser extent. Potassium also to a much lesser extent than the sodium. I think that a big part of this comes down to knowing your sweat rate and knowing if you're a salty sweater. But as I said, your average runner is going to lose about 1,000 milligrams per hour, which is a ton. So you don't have to replace 100% of that. Most sports drinks are going to have, 130 to 220 milligrams per 8 ounces. So if you're drinking getting in that 24 ounces over an hour, you should be covered. But if you're an extra salty sweater, then obviously you have something like the Noon or the Endura Lights or something like that. And it's not just the sodium, it's that whole electrolyte balance that can cause the cramping.
For extra salty sweaters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And it's great because it's easy to carry. You can, especially women and especially the slower runners are at higher risk of greater sodium losses. So towards the end of the race, it's good to have some of those tablets on hand. And as far as the cramps go, yes, it comes down to the electrolyte balance. And so I think, it's just, once you get that fluid and sodium intake right, you shouldn't experience as much of that. If you continue to have problems, sometimes it has to do, obviously, with the change in pace. And sometimes for women, sometimes for women it's inadequate calcium, and sometimes we see it, especially women runners, with inadequate calcium in their overall diet. And then once they run and they lose that extra calcium, even though it's such a small amount, it can cause a problem. And so sometimes it takes digging a little deeper. But one of those 3 things usually solves it. Does that answer your question?
It does. It's perfect. Okay. I know we've had some runners that when it gets really humid out and we're sweating so much that we'll succumb to cramps. Put the video camera on.
Right.
As I hate the video camera. Then we'll succumb to cramps with a packet of salt from McDonald's or wherever.
Yes. Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah. So I think if it's something that happens to you frequently, you want to look at those two things, the fluid and the sodium first, and make sure you're getting those things right. Because you could have cramps just with fluid loss, too much fluid loss, right? Okay. So, and by the way, just probably should point out the symptoms of dehydration, right? Usually thirst mechanism kicks in at about 1% of fluid loss. But already at 1% fluid loss, you see a decrease in performance. It's not until about, like I said, 3% loss that you'll notice a dry mouth. How many of you have had like that dry mouth? So if you have that, it's gone. It's not so far. It's gone like far, right? So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to that. I think I've just talked to so many runners who they think that's normal, to have that dry mouth, because it so easily can happen. But you want to make sure that you're preventing that. And then obviously at 3%, fluid loss, you really can see that decreased performance for sure. Not to mention that you're probably not having as much fun as you could be if you're feeling, dehydrated
and then with training, during training too, I think I've sent out emails about not to be discussing the P test. In terms of, throughout your training, if your urine is
right. That's a great way to know if that's a great indicator. You want it to be really pale yellow, and like you said, across the day, not just before and after training. You really should make sure that urine is pale to light yellow across the day. So I usually recommend 8 ounces an hour. You know, you should be drinking at least a liter, liter and a half. For most of you, about 2 to 3 liters, especially guys, across a day.
Across the day.
Yeah.
What do you recommend in terms of? I think you already said this here, right? In terms of running every hour, you recommend.
Every hour as far as carbohydrates. Well, every hour you should be getting in 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates. That's the first thing and the most important thing. So you can get that in a lot of ways, right? For runners, usually it's a drink, right? Because you're taking the load off the digestive tract. So if you start with a sports drink, you know, usually, you know, 8 to 10 ounces every 15 minutes. So I have a lot of clients who set their watch to beep every 10, 15 minutes to remind them to drink. Because, you know, sometimes you're not focused on that. And especially for dehydration, then you're losing your mental focus too. So all the more reason why you need that reminder sometimes. I should point out too that you want to choose a sports drink you like, right? If you don't like the taste, then you're not going to be wanting to drink it so much. So make sure you choose a sports drink that you like, and you're not going to get sick of it by, you know, 4th hour or whatever it is.
And most marathons typically have Gatorade, so we'll try and get you used to some Powerade too, because I think there are some races.
Yes, they use the endurance formula, though. You're all using the endurance formula, right? Not the Gatorade that you buy at the store?
We have just been using the Gatorade that we buy at the store. We'll get some of the endurance formula.
Yeah, I'd say you definitely want to do the endurance formula. You won't find the endurance formula at a bodega. You'll have to go to Jackrabbit or New York's Running Company or Paragon.
We'll try some of those.
Yeah, I like the Gatorade endurance formula because people are familiar with the Gatorade name, but it also has, you know, a good electrolyte profile. Some of the ones that other people really like too, you know, may be lower in sodium or lower in carbohydrates. But you can try. There are a few. There's also like Perpetuum, Accelerate. If you don't like the Gatorade endurance formula.
One question.
Yeah.
Like normally during long runs, we use power gels and food gels. Are there any natural foods that you can have like dates and stuff?
Sure, you can. There are lots of foods. Well, basically what it comes down to is tolerance. So a lot of people have trouble tolerating food, you know, on a run because of the load on the digestive tract. Obviously, when you're running, that type of activity is jostling the stomach a lot. So if you want to try something that's more natural, I suggest that you just be sure that you take advantage of these training days. You want whatever you do on race day, I repeat, whatever you do on race day, you should have tried a few times. So obviously you're not going to experiment on marathon day, but don't even make it the second attempt. You know, make sure that if you're going to do dates that you tolerate it. Dates I wouldn't recommend because they also have a decent fiber content, and you want to stay away from the fiber foods. You want to kind of think about like a mixture of carbohydrate sources, but all very simple carbohydrates. So nothing with fiber, nothing too complex.
There are also some great all natural organic brands. The honey.
Oh yeah, the Stinger stuff, the honey Stinger stuff.
Yeah, I use that for my triathlons.
Yeah, those are good. You know, again, I think it comes down to having tried it and know that you like it. Some people don't like the chewiness of those chomps, the Stinger things. So yes, you can try it. Some people do well with pretzels, actually. Yeah, like the pretzel sticks. Some people do well with that. I'm trying to think. Rice balls. I know some people do well with rice balls. Yeah, that's the main thing. You can also make your own sports drink, but I don't recommend it.
What about taking you and sports drink together? You should have, or your carbohydrate source.
So you can use both. How should I say this?
You can take it with water, though.
Right. So the sports drinks are designed to have an osmolarity that's similar to the blood. So all sports drinks are, so that they're more easily assimilated. So that's a reason why, by the way, that we want to take the goos with water. So you don't want to take the goo with sports drink because then you kind of are at higher risk for GI distress, right? For issues.
Getting a double whammy.
Yes, exactly. It's more concentrated, so you probably wouldn't feel too great. But you could do, say, for the first hour, rely exclusively on sports drink, and then as you get closer, you don't want to carry a bottle, or you're getting sick of stopping for whatever they're providing, and you have a goo on hand, you could use a goo the next hour or half hour, depending on what your needs are. So yeah, you can combine, but I wouldn't do the goo with sports drink.
So you mentioned before run, couple of hours before run, eating something else.
Yeah.
But mostly we run on Saturday morning, so given marathon,
Right, so well, first I want to say that you should never run without eating something first. So even if you're someone who says, I just can't eat before I run, I understand that. I'm that person too. But, this is a big but, you need to have something. So even if it's a couple crackers out the door, as 4 ounces of a juice or a sports drink, a couple gummy bears, anything, something though, before you run. So even if it's really early in the morning training run or race day you should get up earlier though. Okay, so for race day, so always eat something or drink something before you run. If it's really early on Saturday run or race day, the goal is to get up earlier, and if you can't do that 3 to 4 hours prior, then you can rely on that hour to 2 hours prior. The general rule of thumb is to take your weight in kilograms and aim for that much carbohydrate for an hour before. Okay? So if you can convert your weight to kilograms, it's just basically divide by 2.2, and that's about how many carbohydrate grams you should get in like an hour or so before. Does that make sense? So for example, a bagel is about 60 grams of carbohydrates. So if you weigh 60 kilograms, then you could have a bagel like an hour and a half beforehand, and that would be sufficient. But remember, I talked about the fluids too, so you want to make sure that you're also getting some fluids in with that as well. Yes, I actually stay away from fiber. I recommend 2 days prior to the race.
Can you talk about, I don't know if you talked about the carbo loading before your marathon?
Yeah.
And I say it quote unquote because
we don't use the carbohydrate loading in practice, because we believe that if you're getting your carbohydrate needs in the 50, 55, sometimes 60% of your overall intake, that's what you should be doing on a daily basis anyway if you're training for a marathon. So the idea of carbohydrate loading, it's not really necessary.
It can almost slow you down.
Yes, because if you think about carbohydrates are large part water, you really will gain a lot of fluid weight. That's what carbohydrate loading, will do. It's partly meant to do that. But for a lot of people, that's not practical. It's not something that you would have been experienced, right? So when you start the race, you wouldn't have had experience with that fluid gain. So it's, in our opinion, not really practical.
Over the couple of weeks before, obviously, actually not much before you're really eating your mileage. And
Yeah.
you're going to just be eating more portions of carbohydrate.
Yeah, so that's where I think it's useful to get the RMR test, right? So you do know what your baseline needs are, and you have an idea of how to incorporate those extra needs as your training increases. But it comes down to timing. So when your training increases, a lot of that extra calories, by the way, is going to come during that extra the training time, right? So you have partially that, and then you want to build out the extra whatever's remaining calories that you need in the meals closer to the workout. So your before load might look a little different, your recovery load might look a little different, and now your during fuel looks a little different. So usually that covers the extra needs that you have, but you should always know what your baseline needs are so that you can make those accommodations.
And even though we do the pre-half marathon carbo load, we're not really loading up wild carbos. We're more of a social event where we go and we have.
Yeah, and I think the whole
a little bit of rice, whatever.
Yeah, and I think doing that 2 nights before the race is better than doing it the night before.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's my recommendation: is have that big fun pasta meal or whatever 2 nights before. Then the night before, you're making sure you're meeting your needs. Your needs are increased, and you're getting a decent meal the night before, and you're getting something the morning of. That's my recommendation. How much sugar in the morning?
Yeah.
Well, if you're going on a run that's an hour, or if you're going on a run and it comes down to tolerance, right? I mean, I'd like it if you'd get up an hour before and you'd have a decent breakfast and then go for your run. But if not, you know, you just want to get any sugar in. Simple sugar, right? Because that's just it's going into your blood and you're going to use it up right away. So people say, well, I don't want to gain weight, you know, but it's just going to top off your blood sugar basically, and so that you're not starting on empty. Because you're going to use up some of those glycogen stores overnight, right? So if you're going on a morning run, you know, you don't want to start on empty. Does that answer your question?
I realize that when I do run,
But the point is that sugar is carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates is sugar. So it comes down to the carbohydrates before. So again, I think I would go back to your weight in kilograms, okay? And I use the example of 60 kilograms being equal to a bagel. You know, so if you weigh 60 kilograms and you have a bagel an hour or two before, you should be fine. And that's going to turn into sugar, and then you'll be able to use it. But yes, that's exactly right. When you have fuel, when you have proper fuel, you know, you'll notice a difference in your performance. And I think overall, like, there's 3 real tenets of you know, looking at your diet as far as training goes. I think one is consistency. When you look at your food log, I mentioned, look at consistency. Are you eating every 3 to 4 hours? Are you spreading out your calories across the day and not just eating a huge dinner, coming home starving? And, you know, try to make sure that your calories are spread across the day, that you're eating consistently across the day. The second thing is quality. We all know the difference between broccoli and gummy bears, but gummy bears might be the better choice just before a workout, especially if you haven't planned, right? And then timing. So it all comes down to timing, really, and getting that timing right, knowing kind of what you can tolerate a few hours before, making sure that you're recovering within 30 minutes after, making sure you know what that 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate looks like so that you can have it every hour of your run. So those are the 3 things that you want to make sure that you think about. Any more questions?
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Caffeine.
Caffeine. So caffeine
I
actually...
don't know how many coffee drinkers we have. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I
think last year we had, yeah.
touch upon caffeine a little.
Yeah, so I will say that this... I'm sorry? I thought you did. Well, I wouldn't recommend that. But if you are going to do that, I would be going for a latte or a cappuccino, something that has milk. Because if you combine it with some sort of carbohydrate, it's going to be better. And actually, a lot of the studies that are...
Sorry, two other runners over there.
Oh, it's okay. A lot of the studies that look at the effects of caffeine, you know, do show that it's the effects are primarily with the combination of glucose. So, so some sort of carbohydrate if you have it with that, have milk. So overall, yes, we know that caffeine can enhance performance and can be helpful in a number of ways. What are the general recommendations? Well, it can work against you in terms of hydration. That's the first consideration. So you do want to balance, okay, potentially this could help me, you know, with my energy levels, with my focus, but it could also dehydrate me. So if you want to use a goo or something that has caffeine in it, I think great. But generally speaking, I would, on race day especially, is halve, H-A-L-V-E, have half of your typical caffeine intake on the morning of a race. Because you're already going to have the anxiousness, the adrenaline, and it can cause you to run straight to the porta potty. So,
Should we also be watchful of foods that have the sports, the supplements that have caffeine?
No, because usually I mean, you should know if you're having a supplement that has caffeine in it. You want to know that. But most of those have an appropriate dosage. Yeah. But if you're buying, you know, you should make sure that you're having one of those supplements I talked about. You know, stay away from the ones at GNC that are with branched chain amino acids and caffeine and nitric oxide and all of that stuff. Stay away from those. So those, yeah. But if it's just like a goo with caffeine or something, most of those are fine. Yeah. Protein shakes. So protein shakes means a lot of things, right? I guess if it's something like you're making it with a protein powder and fruit and yogurt, there's a place for that. If you notice though, I didn't mention protein at all, except that you should have a little bit of protein in your recovery meal. So the focus is really carbohydrates, and of course in your recovery meal you want to incorporate some protein as well. But the protein is not really the foundation here. So I think, you know, there is a place for shakes, especially as an athlete, you know, because your needs get so high and sometimes the volume is easier in liquid form. So I think, you know, if it's something like before a workout or right after a workout, I usually say if you like a protein shake, have it as your recovery. You know, especially if you run at the gym or something and they have like a smoothie bar or whatever and you want to get a protein shake, maybe they taste really good. That's perfectly fine. But I do get very wary of a lot of the protein powders that are out there just because they do have a lot of this other, I'm sure you know that all that stuff is in it, and it's not necessarily helpful. What? Yeah, a lot of it, well, no, the protein powders don't have a lot of sugar. The protein shakes do, but the sugar is good, right? Before a workout, after a workout, whatever. So I'd say if you want to make your own, you know, buy a protein powder, just make sure you know what's in the ingredients. Nothing fancy, just protein powder is fine. And you can mix it with fruit and stuff and limit them to like before a workout or after. Yeah. By the way, the Myoplex and all of those muscle milks and stuff like that, people always ask, are those okay for recovery? Yes. But notice that they're really primarily protein. And you want the foundation of carbohydrates with a little bit of protein, not the other way around. So if you want to have something like that, and especially, you know, if you like them, that's fine. But make sure you're pairing it with some carbohydrate source, like fruit or a bagel, bread, a bar, something like that. Anything else?
So we say no, there shouldn't be any alcohol consumption.
Yeah, right, yeah. So it can just lead, it's going to get in the way of hydration, right? And it's also going to cause you to go to the bathroom, which also is what leads to dehydration. So, yeah, so you want to be really mindful. I'd say you really should cut it out completely the week of, if not earlier.
And obviously no going out and partying on Friday.
Right.
before our Saturday run.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I'd like
that's
to see you all in the morning.
I think that's a good point though, is that, you know, even though race day is different, you know, you should really be, all throughout training, you should really be limiting your alcohol intake.
You're going to fight too as you're running, you know, if you're training for a marathon and you're trying to get really long miles. You really don't want alcohol. You just, at least my body just doesn't crave it. I want to go home and go to bed. Right,
and remember I said just 1% of fluid loss is decreased performance. So if you're starting on empty for sure if you have a couple of drinks the night before. Just a couple, you know. So, did you want me to talk about the sweat test quickly? Okay, so, and before, we were talking about the RMR, and I just want to point out that we take insurance, and if you do want to come in just for the RMR, you can do that. Insurance covers it usually. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's really important for athletes to know their RMR.
And what about for like initial consultations?
Yeah, we take insurance, yep, for anything. But I'm just saying, even if you just want to come in for the RMR, you can do that. Most of like an initial consultation would be like an hour and a half. The RMR, if you just want to do the RMR, we could do that in probably like 30 minutes. So just so you know, because I think it's important. And then the sweat test. So I would recommend this if you came into me. So I want to tell you about it, but it's a little bit complicated. Well, it's not complicated, but if you have to remember it. So basically, I said you weigh yourself before and after. Okay. You want to write down how much weight you lost. Okay. You want to write down how much fluid you drank. So measure out the amount of fluid that you want to consume, and if you don't consume it all, just make sure you know how much you did. Write down how much you consumed, and write down how long you worked out. So if it's an hour and a half, okay? So you want to figure out how many ounces you lost, so you're going to convert your weight loss in pounds to ounces by multiplying by 16. And so you're going to add that to the fluid you consumed, right, to find out really how much you lost. So now you have the sum of your weight loss in ounces and the fluid you drank in ounces. Okay, so you take that number and you divide it by the time that you worked out. Okay, so to find out how much you lost per hour. Does that all make sense? Okay, so then you want to take that number and divide it by 6 or 4, depending on if you want to drink every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes. So it's kind of complicated, but I'm just going to throw it out there. that you guys should really do it, because you should really know your sweat rate. So if it's a matter of you coming in and me giving you a form and you just writing it down, we don't usually get into that too much because it's kind of a general overview today, but I wanted to say that to save you the visit or whatever, but you really should do it. Okay. Do you want me to say that again?
Yeah, I just
okay.
write it down too. I want to come in for a visit anyway.
Okay, so you weigh yourself before and after, preferably naked. But as I said, if you need to put on clothes dry after, right? So if you weigh yourself in clothes the first time, then you just need to change your clothes and make sure you're dry. Weigh yourself before and after, so you know how much fluid you lost.
So weigh yourself before and after. I'm just going to say naked.
Yes. Okay. You're gonna record your weight loss in pounds, and then multiply by 16 to get your weight loss in ounces. And you want to know how much fluid you drank over the course of your workout. So you really want to have your fluid in a measured container, so you know how much fluid you drank. And you want to know how long you worked out. Ideally, I always recommend do it in a couple situations, because the temperature obviously now is going to be different from the temperature in a race day. So it's nice to know your sweat rate at different temperatures. But for now, just to kind of work off for your training, you can do it as much as possible. Mimic the, do it on one of these runs. Maybe have well, I guess you couldn't really do it here, but okay. So anyway, and try not to go to the bathroom after. If you really have to go, then go, but you'll have to do the sweat test again another day. Okay. So you have your weight loss in pounds. You're multiplying that by 16 to get your weight loss in ounces. Now you're adding to that the fluid that you drank. Okay? And then you're dividing that number by the time that you worked out. So if you're working out for an hour and a half, you're going to divide that by 1.5. In 1 hour, that's fine. Then you just zero. But if it's more than an hour, you really should be. No, well, it does only that you want to take it into account if you drank. Yeah, but your sweat rate should be this. Your sweat rate is your sweat rate. Well, the only thing that affects your sweat rate is like the temperature and humidity levels and altitude. But otherwise, it should be fine.
So I guess you can't eat anything either.
Well, you could eat.
You're taking out more weight there? I'm thinking about the wrong way.
No, yeah, we're just talking about weight loss to fluid.
Yeah.
Weight lost to fluid. So if you were to eat something, it would be fine. But you probably won't, right? You probably wouldn't eat something. Yeah. Let's see. So now the goal is you have the number of ounces lost over an hour, right? That's the end goal there. Once you divide it by the duration of your workout. So that now you want to.
The end goal is number.
The end goal is the number of ounces you lost per hour, right? And then you want to divide that by 4 or 6, depending on if you want to. I usually say divide it by 4 and divide it by 6 and see what it looks like. Because sometimes if it's every 4, if it's too much to take in every 15 minutes, then it may be better every 10 minutes. But basically the difference is if you're going to drink every 10 minutes, that's what, if you divide by 6, that's the amount that you're going to drink every 10 minutes. If you divide by 4, that's the amount you're going to drink every 15 minutes. And then you can take that and you can set your stopwatch to beep every 15 minutes, and you know you should drink whatever the number was for when you divide it by 4, or you can set it to beep every 10 minutes, and then you drink what it was divided by 6. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions? It's a lot. We talked about a lot. No?
No.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Good, no problem. Thank you for having me. Oh, yeah, sure. I'm Brooke, Paugh. I'm a registered dietitian with Nutrition Energy.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.